Capitalism is essentially a system of mass production for the satisfaction of the needs of the masses. It pours a horn of plenty upon the common man. It has raised the average standard of living to a height never dreamed of in earlier ages. It has made accessible to millions of people enjoyments which a few generations ago were only within the reach of a small elite. That is a great quote from Ludwig von Mises in the Anti-Capitalist Mentality. Today, to talk about capitalism and neo-Marxism is the professor at Rockford University in Illinois, Professor Stephen Hicks. How are you, Professor Hicks?
I'm very well. Beautiful day here. Hope the same for you.
Absolutely. So let's get into definitions so we know what we're talking about instead of just throwing around loaded terms. What is capitalism, or liberal capitalism as you call it, and why is it a moral system?
Okay, good. Well, three concepts there: capitalism, liberalism, and morality. Capitalism, I use it to describe a system of economic freedom where individuals are free in their productive lives, in their consumption lives, in their trading lives to do as they judge best. And that is a reciprocal expectation and practice and codified in law, that people on the other side with whom you are productive partners, you're working with them, you're trading with them, or you decide to consume some food with them or whatever, they also are doing so voluntarily. Now, capitalism can also refer to a subset of economically free systems, ones in which the economy is sophisticated enough and mature enough that there's a significant enough amount of capital and people are living off capital investing. And the contrast there would be to earlier free economies, but people are still working with their hands. They're still setting up physical markets and engaging in them personally. So it can either just mean, broadly speaking, the system of economic freedom or a mature system of economic freedom. Now, the liberal part comes in just as a clarification, partly to indicate that economic freedom is part of a broader conception of a free life. That we do, of course, need to make a living, put food on the table, engage in business transactions, and typically economics focuses on that part. But that's not the only thing that we do in our lives. We engage in leisure activities. We watch movies. We engage in artistic pursuits, whether we are professional artists or not. We spend time with our friends. We travel the world. And all of those things can involve an economic component, but they're not primarily about producing goods and trading goods in a market economy. So the point of adding the liberal adjective is to say that we're talking about a system of economic freedom, but within the broader context of a liberal philosophy, that you are free as a human being in all areas of life: your artistic pursuits, your family pursuits, scientific pursuits, religious pursuits, musical pursuits, and then also in business, you should be a free agent. Now, the second question is not a definitional question, but it's an argumentative question about the moral status of capitalism. And my view is that capitalism is not only a moral system, it is the moral system. The reason for that is, we have to start first, though, by, again, definition. What do we mean by being moral? And for purposes of this short discussion, I would make 2 points. Being a moral person is being fully self-responsible for your life, to take charge of your life and say, I am going to do it myself. I'm a moral agent. I can think for myself. I can take responsibility for my emotional life. I can formulate my goals. I can initiate the actions, and I'm going to be self-supporting. This is, I think, normally a developmentally healthy thing. When we are children, we rely a lot on our parents for what should I think about things, and they give us lots of information and advice as an emotional support network, financial support network. But as we mature, those responsibilities, we take them on ourselves. It should be a happy taking on. I look at what I can do, mommy and daddy. that's a person being self-responsible and taking pride in their ability to be self-responsible. Now, I say that's a moral trait, and the contrast to that is people who, in various ways, are irresponsible. They want to live as parasites upon other people. They expect other people to do their thinking for them. They expect other people, if they become emotional basket cases, to sort out their problems for them. They want to be dependent financially on other people. You know, they will mooch and they will try to get other people to support them and so on. So that kind of parasitism, I think, is profoundly immoral, and no self-respecting person should be right a part of that. Now, another more sophisticated kind of parasitism is a predator kind of lifestyle, where again, you don't produce and earn your own way in the world. You expect other people to make the stuff that you want, and then you just defraud them or steal from them. So anybody who is engaging in parasitism or predation is a profoundly immoral person. And only the person of self-responsibility is a moral person. I'm picking up some buzzing here. Are you getting that too? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I said at my end or at
yeah.
your end?
You know what? I took my headphones off and I don't hear it on
Well,
my end.
You know what it is? I think there is someone doing some lawn mowing in the next yard outside, so hopefully it won't last for too much longer. I'll see if I can muffle it a little bit. I think my mic is down here. Where is it actually? Right somewhere around. Anyway, am I still coming through clearly enough that we should continue? Okay,
Yep.
So, all right, first. Now, then if we consider moral systems just on that criterion of morality, does a social system or a political system encourage people to be self-responsible, then all of the other social systems are largely irresponsible in varying degrees. Socialism is the most outstanding example of that, because socialism says to every individual, you are not self-responsible. Everybody else has a responsibility to look after you. The government has a responsibility to look after you. And one of the major attractions, I think, for a large number of people who really don't want to be responsible for their own lives, socialism is attractive to them because they think, oh, everybody's going to look after me. I've got free this, free that, free everything for the rest of my life. And in my perspective, that's at least an arrested development. But if you're an adult, then there really is no excuse for that kind of thinking about your life in the world. Other forms of society that are based on conquest, if we think of any sort of imperialistic system, that is, say we have our culture, we're just going to conquer other people and take their stuff. And that's your conception of what politics should be about. And that has been the vast majority of political systems throughout history. All of those, I think, are then profoundly immoral political systems. Fascism and National Socialism in its contemporary forms seem to be just more sophisticated forms of that. We saw that in the Germans, right? We want to conquer other people, take their stuff, and live largely at their expense. So self-responsibility, I use that as one fundamental criterion of morality, and capitalism is a moral system that says, respects people's self-responsibility, and says to the extent that you take charge of your life, you're going to be living a fulfilling life. Now, another criterion I would use is human beings are moral agents because they have the capacity for free choice. We are volitional creatures. We're not automatic. We don't operate on instinct. We don't get pushed around entirely by forces beyond our control. We are moral to the extent that we make choices and accept the responsibility for our own choices. So respecting humans' free will and their agency and control over their own lives, I think, is another moral fundamental. It's the thing that makes you a human being compared to other kinds of species. So what then makes capitalism moral is that built into it at a fundamental level is to say that all social interactions, you and I interacting, whether as friends or in business or in any walk of life, it must be voluntary. We must both choose to enter into that relationship. And I am a free agent. I can walk away from that relationship if I don't want to enter into it. You also are a free agent. You can walk away from that relationship if you don't want to. If we're going to continue, it's because we have both voluntarily decided to continue. So capitalism is moral because of the self-responsibility emphasis and because of the voluntariness emphasis. All other social systems, they build in force, compulsion, coercion at a very fundamental level. So socialism, again, is a very extreme example on the other side. You make stuff, all of your production is going to be taken away from you and redistributed to society as a whole. Now, you might be a recipient of everyone else's productivity, but the bottom line is the government is coercively taking away all of their stuff and redistributing it to everyone, some of it to you. So it's a coercive redistribution system. Any political system based on coercion, conquest, imperialism, and so forth also is explicitly basing itself on compulsion. It's denying the fundamental voluntariness, and I believe that makes them all immoral in varying degrees. So that's my short answer.
So that then leads us to a quote from one of your speeches where you refer to bleeding heart libertarians. The quote is, "The moral justification of our institutions depends on how well these institutions serve the interests of the poor and least advantaged. So why should poor people favor liberal capitalism?"
2 points. I agree with the bleeding heart liberalism, or libertarians rather, that capitalism, free market capitalism, is the best system for the poor. My disagreement is that they want to give the poor special moral standing in our evaluation of social systems. And I think it's wrong to say, when we're figuring out what's the right kind of social system, that we should start out by dividing people into groups. In this case, dividing them into groups according to their economic status. So our first question is going to be, are you rich, are you middle income, or are you poor? And then what we're going to do is have our kind of thumb on the scale for one of those groups. I think just as it would be wrong to say capitalism is great because primarily it helps really rich people, or because it helps people in the middle class, it's the same mistake to say it's really good because it helps this particular group. There should not be any moral privileging of people according to economic status or gender status or religious status or any status. The right unit is the individual, whatever your race, economic status, gender, ethnicity, and so forth. And the question is, are you free to operate as a moral agent, take responsibility for your life, and function in the world? So I disagree with the moral evaluation approach. It's a Rawlsian approach that the bleeding heart libertarians are taking there. Now, all of that aside, the second part of your question is, suppose I am a poor person, what kind of social system should I want to be in? Or suppose I know I'm not a poor person, but I care about poor people and I don't want them to be in that situation. What kind of system do I think is best for them? Then I think it's very obvious that free market capitalism is the best kind of system here. And it's not only because it's respecting your freedom as a human being. We're also interested in results. And one of the results we want is to be able to live the best, prosperous, wealthy life, however we define that. And for most of us, that does involve increasing our material situation, lifting ourselves out of poverty as we're so sorry. So what I say about poor, in case you look at the historical record, if you're poor, that could mean a number of things. And you want to get out of poverty, well, the best way to get out of poverty is by coming up with a creative business idea, starting your own business and working very hard. So entrepreneurship as a way out of poverty is a very self-responsible, proactive, initiative-oriented way of doing things. And only in free market capitalism is entrepreneurship encouraged. If we think about poor people in a tribal economy, you're in a tribal economy, you're not just allowed to go off and do whatever creative idea you want. You are bound by the conventions and the requirements of your tribal economy. If you're in a socialist economy, you cannot just, and you're a poor person in a socialist economy, you cannot just start your own business because you've got a creative idea and a lot of energy. You have to ask permission from the government. And if it doesn't fit the government's pan, you're not going to be able to do so. In a fascist economy, you can't just go off and entrepreneurially work your way out. Again, you have to follow the rules as dictated by the fascist government. Or in a monarchy, you have to ask permission of the king, or feudalism, right, and so forth. So capitalism offers to the poor the opportunity, if you've got an idea and you've got some energy, to go for it. You've got the freedom to get yourself out of poverty. Okay, so that's, I think, very important. And the historical record then is the millions and millions and millions of people who started off desperately poor, but they were in a relatively free system, and so they could entrepreneurially get themselves out of poverty. Now, suppose, though, you're poor and you're not particularly entrepreneurial. Well, if you're going to get out of poverty, what you need is then a job. And then the question is going to be, what kind of social system will most likely offer you a job so that you can then work your way out of poverty? And just having a steady job is importantly a way to do so. So then we say, well, the kind of economy that's going to provide poor people with the most jobs is going to be a prosperous, vigorous, dynamic economy. Those are the ones that are the most job-creating economies. Tribal economies are not growth industries for jobs, neither are socialist economies and so forth. But capitalism is a very dynamic, job-generating, innovative, prosperous kind of economy. So, and again, the historical record shows this. People who are very poor and they want to improve themselves materially, people will immigrate for any number of reasons: religious freedom, political freedom, or the opportunity to improve their economic circumstances. They always choose the more free market capitalist cases because they know that's where the most job opportunities are. So if you're poor, you want to be in a free market capitalist economy if you're going to get the job. Now, maybe you're not entrepreneurial, maybe you're not in a position to get a job. The reason why you are poor is that you've got some sort of handicap, a physical handicap, right, or a mental handicap. And so it's not that realistic that you're going to start your own business or even be able to hold down a job. So if you're in that circumstance, then as a poor person, you're necessarily going to depend upon the charity or the philanthropy of other people to keep you alive. And so then the question is going to be, what kind of society is going to have a significant amount of surplus wealth so that there's going to be more charity and more philanthropy, so that if I end up in that society, I'm going to be or more likely to be a recipient of that. And then again, it's the same argument that will be applied in the second stage to say, socialist economies are poor, tribal economies are poor, feudal economies, et cetera, they don't become prosperous. Capitalist countries become rich and they generate all kinds of charitable, nonprofit, philanthropic organizations. And so, to put it bluntly, if you're poor and handicapped, I think you want to be in a free market capitalist society. One thing I like to look at here, I've got some friends who are in this category, so I know a little bit about this, but I remember doing a Google search for wheelchairs. And when I did a search, there were 3,200 listings for different kinds of wheelchairs, right, just at Amazon. And so the question is going to be, if you're in a socialist country, how many wheelchairs are going to be available to you with all of the bells and trimmings and options, and what are they going to cost? If you're in a tribal economy or a fascist economy, and so forth. Well, actually, what we know in most of those economies is if you're a poor and handicapped person, they leave you for the wolves, or they put a bullet in the back of your head because you're seen as a drain on society. So you don't want to be poor and handicapped in any other kind of system.
You have a class that I read about on your syllabus, and the title is, "Are You Rich or Are You Poor?" How do you get people to think about that question and how we measure wealth?
Ah, yeah, that's a great question. Normally, when we think about that question, we think about it the way economists do, and that's a perfectly legitimate subset way of thinking about measuring wealth. So we measure people's productivity, and we can try to capture that in some monetary currency. Now the standard is to capture it in dollars. We might also try to measure wealth in terms of what you can actually buy with your money, the array of goods and services, the quality of them, the quantity of them, the price of them, and so forth. So one way of doing it is how much money are you able to earn and what can you actually get with the money that you have? That's one pretty good but subset measure of how wealthy you are. Now, the way I think of it, though, since I'm not a professional economist, I'm a philosopher who knows enough about economics to be a little bit dangerous. But let me give you a philosopher's way of measuring or stating what wealth is. Wealth is having the capacities, including monetary wealth, to achieve your goals in life. And some of your goals can include making a lot of money, but often we think about making a lot of money as a stand-in, as a means to an end, because we don't want to just keep the money under our mattress. We want the good things that money can buy. And our wealth is our, typically at this point, qualitative measure of how close to my ideal am I at being able to enjoy the things that I value in life. So then we say, having a certain amount of money in the bank or investment so I don't have to worry about money, or having a job that I enjoy, that's a form of wealth. Having friendships is a form of wealth. We say things like, friendships enrich my life. So the rich concept is in there. Having loving friends, family members is important. Those of us who are parents, we will all have this experience of just looking at our kids doing whatever it is that they're doing and saying, wow, I'm a rich man, right, in this case, just thinking about how much your kids, or I am rich in aesthetic experience because I'm able to enjoy the movies and the paintings and the music that I enjoy in life. Or the cliche, that's an absolutely true cliche, that time is money. Having disposable time and having control over your time so you can do the things that you genuinely want to be doing. That's another mark of riches there. Now, there's some interesting technical issues about how we get from the economist's attempt to measure things in terms of money as a universal medium of exchange, as a universal way of measuring the value of things, to all of these things that are often non-monetary or intangible. And that's another whole interesting discussion in itself. But one way to think about that is in terms of the monetary value of the work time that we place on other things. So if, for example, it's, you've worked all week and normally you take Saturdays off and you spend that, say, with your friends. You're going to go off and do something with your friends on Saturday. But your boss calls you up on Friday night and says, can you come into work tomorrow, Saturday? And then the question is going to be, at what dollar value, since we're in the American context here, at what dollar value would you say yes? And at what dollar values would you say no? So you ask the sensible question, your boss says, well, I will pay you $50 to come in. And then you say, no. Well, what you're saying is your day with your friends is, even though you don't put a monetary value to it normally, worth more to you than the $50. But if your boss says, I'm expecting we're going to be super busy, I'm going to pay you $200 to come in on Saturday and work, and then you say, oh, okay. And then you call up your friends and say, not making it this weekend, let's reschedule. Then what you're saying is your day with your friends is worth less than $200 to you. And you could try to be fine tuning on that. You might then say, well, if my boss offered me $120, I would do it. But if it was only 150, I wouldn't do it. Then you're saying the marginal value to you of your free time of that particular day is somewhere in the $150 to $120. And we can start doing that with other things. So Yeah, we'll do it on the consumption side as well. Suppose you've got $20 and you want to go to the movies. We make this judgment call on a fairly regular basis. We say, well, I would pay $10 to see that movie, but I wouldn't pay $15 to see that movie. And there, what we're trying to do is measure the value added of, say, 2 hours of aesthetic experience at the movie. So there are ways of effecting the translation, so something like that. But the more important, I think, philosophical ways of measuring how wealthy you are is to become clear about what the genuinely important things are to you in your life and what capacities and powers you have to achieve those things. And to the extent that you answer positively, you are wealthy. Now, the class that you mentioned that I talk about these issues, because it gets very complex very, very quickly, is that I'd like to use some historical data, partly just income measures of how wealthy people on average now, so that the average American now has access to about $55,000, say, dollars per year. But for most of human history, people lived on $400 to $500 per year, as far as we can tell. So that then is to say, the average American is already 100 or 150 times as wealthy as the average person a while ago. But other measures I think are important. One measure of wealth is life expectancy. How much time do you have? And I think a good argument can be made for saying that the most valuable asset you have is time. And we only get a certain amount of that. But if you reflect on the fact that 200 years ago, average life expectancy was in the middle 30s, that then is to say the rich people on average at birth still got about 30-something years. But now even our poor people get well over 70 years of life. So the average poor person in our country is twice as rich as the average rich person 200 years ago. And I think that says something. Another measure of riches is, here again, I'm thinking about parenting. If you think about how much value having your children in your life is, realizing that infant mortality rates used to be horrendously high before capitalism, before, more broadly speaking, the liberal Enlightenment world. So you would have 8 babies, 4 to 5 of them on average would die in the first 5 years. And that's awful. You have 8 babies now, basically all 8 of them are going to make it. And we think of it as a horrible tragedy. So we are much richer in our parenting lives as well. So that's a hard question, but it's a good question about measuring wealth.
And I want to skip to, because I know we're limited with time, I want to skip to the idea of Marxism. What is the Frankfurt School?
Yeah, well, interesting question. That is quite a transition, isn't it? Frankfurt School is a school of broadly neo-Marxist thinkers, but they are about 2 generations after the historical Marx. If roughly we put the dates at, say, Communist Manifesto was published in 1848, and then Marx is writing more sophisticated stuff in the 1850s and 60s. But what we have in classical Marxism is a certain analysis about how capitalism is going to develop. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer. There will be all of this increasing class consciousness. The poor will realize how oppressed and exploited they are. They will get their act together as a movement. They will rise up violently and overthrow the capitalists, and then there will be a dictatorship of the proletariat. So there's some very specific predictions that come out of Marxism. And for the most part, what Marxists were doing in the 1800s and the early 1900s, say before World War I, was saying, the revolution is coming, the revolution is coming. And they sound a lot, when you read them, like apocalyptic Christians who believe that Judgment Day is coming, Judgment Day is coming, Judgment Day is coming. And essentially, we don't have to do a lot because there are certain forces at work, economically deterministic forces that Marx had described as going to bring about the revolution. There had been some Marxists who started to fall away from Marxism in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But World War I was very much a shaking up for Marxists. On the one hand, most Marxists were very energized by the creation of the Soviet Union in the wake of World War I. That what Lenin and then Stalin and Trotsky and the others were doing was the right way to go. But if you're going to be in favor of Leninism, you have to recognize that it is a variation on Marxism, because Russia did not get to the dictatorship of the proletariat by going through mature capitalism. It kind of leapfrogged over the capitalist stage. So what we need then to do is to have some kind of neo-Marxism, what we now call Marxist-Leninism or Marxist-Stalinism, which is already a variation on that. But for Western Marxists who weren't just kind of true believers in what was going on in the Soviet Union, they also started to recognize that the initial Marxist theoretical model had some fairly serious problems, that it didn't seem to be that capitalism was going in the direction that Marx had predicted. It's not that there's a smaller number of capitalists controlling all the wealth. Instead, what seems to be happening is that capitalism is increasing the number of wealthy people. There's more and more millionaires rather than fewer and fewer controlling all of the wealth. And that's a theoretical problem. Marxism had said that the middle class was going to be squeezed out by the forces of this zero-sum competition, but then we see the middle class is expanding. The number of people living in absolute poverty was supposed to be going up and up and up under capitalism, but it seems like the number of poor people is going down under capitalism. So there are any number of people who came out of Marxism but were recognizing that classical Marxism needed to be rethought. Marx is basically on the right track about alienation and exploitation and oppression, but this theory is too simple. Now, the Frankfurt School is one group of very serious thinkers based at an institute in Frankfurt, Germany. Some of the big names here are Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, a little bit later, Herbert Marcuse, and all of them are coming out of Marxism, but arguing that Marxism's psychology, its social psychology, its understanding of sociology is too limited, and that we need a more sophisticated sociology, social psychology, and psychology to complement the basic Marxist insights. So what they're doing is they're drawing upon, say, Freudian psychoanalysis, with the idea that we get from Freud that there's all kinds of under the surface instinctual energy that is repressed and oppressed, even if consciously the person seems like a civilized, decent, rational human being. Underneath the surface, there really is all of this nasty sex and aggression stuff that's going on. And they say the same thing then we need to do when we talk about the social psychology of capitalism, because capitalism might very well seem like everything is peaceful and prosperous and we're all trading and getting rich with each other. But under the surface, there is all of this hidden, seething irrationality and exploitation and oppression. And the specially trained critical theorist is the one who can get past what seems to be the progressive good news story that we can tell about capitalism and spot the hidden oppressions and the hidden irrationalities that are going on underneath the surface. So something like that is a quick 2 or 3 minute gloss on Frankfurt School. It's a way of, I would say, saving Marx's core insights, but updating them in the wake of almost a century of failed Marxist predictions.
Yeah, I'm always curious why feminists never admire someone like Ayn Rand, who escaped communism in the Soviet Union, got a job in Hollywood, learned a new language, and then wrote 2 of the best-selling books of all time. Why is it that social justice warriors, feminists, and race baiters are almost always far leftists?
Yeah. Well, I'll take your first point about feminism and its relation to someone like Ayn Rand. Feminism, of course, is a very broad label. I think the important thing when one uses the label feminism is always to put an adjective in front of it, because feminism has a long history, and what it means is that in some sense you are in favor of women's liberties, equalities, rights, standing, and so forth. And there's a long tradition of, I think, perfectly good liberal individualistic feminism that takes essentially Enlightenment values, equal rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, equal social standing, equal respect for women as moral agents, getting rid of any legal double standards or social double standards, and respecting women as individuals and their accomplishments, so that just as men more often historically have done can go on and do wonderful things with their lives, women can do this too. And the fruits of that sort of feminism have been the large number of, or the increasing number of very accomplished women in the 19th century and 20th century as that form of feminism went on. So Marie Curie, I think her Polish last name was Skłodowski or something like that, Polish-French scientist, winner of 2 Nobel Prizes. She, by genuine feminists, right, should be celebrated, but doesn't seem to be, right, so much. Or someone like Florence Nightingale, who founded a professionalizing of nursing and so on. So women who've gone on to do wonderful things in business. What we do seem to have right now is, and I don't know that these are the majority of feminists these days, or just the most outspoken of them, who don't seem at all to be interested in actual women who have taken charge of their lives and gone on and done something significant up with it. And I believe that is because they have been captured by a victim ideology. Right? They have taken, and it's not only Marx's oppression theory and translated that into a contemporary feminist form. There are also Rousseauian and other versions of this as well. But any view of society that says there's the strong and there are the weak, and the strong get strong by taking advantage of the weak and keeping them down, and that if you're in the weaker class, there's nothing that really you can do about it. And so it justifies you in feeling sorry for yourself. And there are any number of people for ideological reasons, or I think sometimes for psychological reasons, and sometimes for careerist reasons, who very much like that victim narrative and that victim ideology, and so they keep it going. So what we call social justice warrior right now, and it does come in racial versions, ethnic versions, religious versions, and gendered versions, I think is a tail end of a long series of failed grievance political ideologies that, when they actually look at the historical record, they recognize that for their group, things have gotten a lot better. But they don't like the formal philosophies and the actual institutions that enabled people to improve. So if you want to say, for example, that women as a group, say in the prosperous nations of the world, have gotten a whole lot better. They now have careers, they have education, they have entrepreneurial opportunities, they have equal social standing, that there have been great gains. Well, the credit for doing that is liberal capitalism, individualism, industrial revolution. But we have a group of people who, for ideological reasons, are opposed to all of those things. So you want to keep, or they want to rather keep, the grievance and oppression identity part of that. That's what they are committed to. But at the same time, they cannot give credit to what they see as the opposite ideological system that actually did something to improve the lot of the group that they're supposed to be in favor of. So something like that.
What is the most important thing you learned from reading Ayn Rand?
Well, Rand is great, both as an intellectual and as a novelist. She's a high romantic. And so if romanticism in the arts and in literature is your style, you'll find her a very exciting read. If you are jaded or cynical, then you'll find her very alienating. At the same time, she is an iconoclastic intellectual. And like iconoclastic intellectuals, she's brilliant at putting her finger on some fundamental issues that push everyone's buttons if you are a passionate, thoughtful person, and pushing really hard on those buttons and getting you going intellectually and emotionally as well. So I find her intellectually stimulating and emotionally very engaging. So I think I would say the thing that most struck me when I first started reading Rand, I read her novel, The Fountainhead, when I was a teenager, and it really did blow me away. I think the thing that I was most struck by was the contrast between her main character, Howard Roark, and her initial foil character, Peter Keating. And the theme here is independence and integrity. And what you see in those two characters is a battle, and it's a moral battle for your soul. And one thing that I think almost all of us resonate with when we are younger is forming our own values, thinking for ourselves, deciding what we agree with, what we reject, what our tastes are in food, music, and so forth. And we take very seriously, usually, our wanting to do things ourselves, to become an authentic individual. And if we're lucky and we have good parents and good teachers, they will encourage us in this process. But at the same time, there are any number of social pressures that are put on us by our parents, by our peers, by our teachers and others to conform, to obey, to do what everybody else is doing, to follow their lead, not to challenge, and so on. So it does take in us almost always some measure of courage to be able to think for ourselves, and when we disagree with someone, to say, I disagree, and let's have maybe a discussion about this, but if we can't resolve, then I would like really to do things my own way. So one of the things that Rand is grappling with in The Fountainhead is not so much politics, the idea that other people in political power can tell you what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to do. Most of us, we get our backs up and we're willing to fight for freedom because dictatorship is just evil and wicked. But even if you're in a free society, there's a surprising number of people who will accept a softer tyranny, a softer kind of dictatorship. And that is, if their friends seem to disapprove of something, they find it very hard to stand up for themselves, and they'll be more willing rather to sell their soul in order to be part of that friendship group. Or if their parents start to act dictatorially, they won't push back, or their teachers. So of course, that's a harder one because parents are adults and you're a child, and the same thing holds for teachers. But we're more likely to be angry about political dictators, but more likely to be accepting of softer forms of social dictatorialism. And we really will become conformist, obedient people, even if we are living in a very free society. So the battle, as Rand saw it, and this is a very striking theme to me, was about freedom, not necessarily in a political context, but in a social psychological context. And what does it really take for you to be able to think for yourself, form your own values, and then go for it in your own life, recognizing that you're going to get some opposition, you're going to take some grief from other people who disagree with you. And that courage and genuine independence was a striking theme to me. And of course, Howard Roark is an idealistically drawn character, but I found him very compelling. And her foil character, Peter Keating, who basically sold his soul out to basically the highest bidder at each stage in his life, ended up not developing its own independence or having any integrity at all. I found him repellent, but it was very illuminating for me to see all of the variations upon how one can sell one's soul. So my recommendation would be read Rand's Fountainhead. That's a great treatise on morality, even if it is portrayed in fictional form, if you're genuinely interested in independence and integrity as moral virtues.
And I do want to respect your time. I know we have 4 minutes left. I just want to ask you, what is philosophy and why should people care?
Well, now you're speaking my language as a philosophy professor. In a rough and ready sense, we all use philosophy when we start talking about the fundamentals of any enterprise that we are engaging in. So you will hear the leader of your business say, our philosophy of business is, and at that point, the CEO or the manager is saying, these are the fundamental principles and values that we are committing to in this business. Or at a school, we will say our philosophy of education is, and then they will fill in what they take to be the mission of the school, the core values and principles that that school is trying to achieve. Now, philosophy in general then is a generalization on that. What is your mission in life? At the broadest level, who do you think of yourself as? Who are you? What do you stand for? What are your core values going to be? What are you trying to accomplish in life? How do you think about the social world and then more broadly, the natural world and the universe that you are a part of? So to be philosophical, not necessarily to be a philosopher and to do it professionally, but to be philosophical, I think, is built into being a human being, because we are thoughtful people, and some of us do it more and some of it do us less, but we think about what our life in general is all about. And now, partly because we're prosperous and teenagers can spend a lot of time, we do have this notion that one really should explore the world, explore yourself, interact with a lot of other people, get lots and lots of data, and then by the time you're an adult and ready to go off on your own, have a worked out philosophy of life that is genuine, that's yours, that you've thought it through, that functions in your minds as a set of general principles that serve as your template or your architecture for how you're going to live your life. So that's philosophy.
All right. Well, Professor Hicks, thank you so much for your time. Again, I'm sorry?
I said a pleasure, Keith. Thanks.
Oh, yes. I do want to highly recommend this book, especially the chapter, The Crisis of Socialism, that was so productive. Thank you again, and thank you everyone for watching.
All right. Thanks, Keith. Bye for now.